Alright guys, got a longer format 60-minute game now with a player rated 684 in Rapid, so we're just under the 700 mark. And if this is a rated game, then there will be no points available should I win, but 16 if I lose. Okay, so the knights come out to c3 to attack my pawn. I'll just play knight to f6. I don't usually play d5 against d4, we're trying to mix things up. So what we're looking at is players around the 700 mark. What mistakes do they make? What are their normal weaknesses? How do you win against them? And if you're around the 700 mark, how do you improve? Okay, so we have a quiet pawn push now. Problem with that is it's making life a bit difficult for the dark squared bishop to get out into the board. So I'm going to complete my development. I'm going to do something similar, but I'm going to bring my bishop out before I move my e-pawn. My e-pawn could come to e5 or e6, depending. So the first thing to be looking at is how quickly do both sides get all of their pieces developed and complete development. The quickest you can do it is 8 moves. We've made 3 so far. So in order to get my other bishop out, I'm going to have to move one more pawn, then get the bishop out, then get the knight out. So let's say pawn, knight, bishop, queen off the back rank, and castle. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have a check. It's a bit of a pointless check. I can simply push c6. That's a decent move for me anyway. It means I've now got a little bit of a pawn chain there, and it means that white has to retreat. So now this comes with more tension. So I've got a couple of options. I could drop my bishop back. I don't want to exchange and get rid of a developed piece and allow white to develop his queen for free. Another option is bishop to g4. That might invite this pawn push, but that could actually be strengthening for me. So let's go with that one. Attacking the queen, bishop's defended by the knight. So here we've taken a couple of moves out from completing development for some tactical exchanges. Okay, so now my bishop's under threat. I'm just going to drop my bishop back to h5. So I've lost the tempo with that, but I have forced black to play f3, which is somewhat of a concession. Opens up this diagonal towards the king. You don't want to move your f-pawn unless you must, and in that instance he didn't have to. Could have just dropped the knight in front instead, which would have blocked the attack on the queen and developed a piece at the same time. So that's something that beginners will very often miss. They'll use a pawn move instead of a piece move, but if the piece move is developing, then that's actually much better for you. So in this instance, I think, yes, I mean the pawn move won a tempo, that's one thing that you could argue, but I think knight to there would have been much stronger, because now this knight controls more squares on the board. Okay, and now we have a knight move to the rim. Am I concerned about this? Am I concerned about knight to here? I can drop my bishop back, takes, recapture with the pawn, that's okay. I'm not worried. I'm just going to carry on. e6 allows my bishop out into the board, maybe to there, maybe to there. A second knight move here would also be slow for white. Okay, that's fine. I'll just drop my bishop back here. It was actually defended by the knight as well on that square. So would doing nothing have been a good option? Okay, so now in this instance now I'll be even happier if knight takes bishop or even bishop takes bishop, because that means I get to get rid of my h-pawn. So now I'm thinking maybe it's time to start thinking about castling queenside and starting an attack up the king side there. If you know me, I like opposite side castling, I like my pawn storms. It just makes me happy. And maybe bishop to d6, looking at this knight. Now that the king has vacated his normal e1 square, then that makes this bishop move less interesting, because the king is now here, so I really want my bishop on that long diagonal if possible. And there may be opportunities to do that. Okay, so what is this bishop move done? It's no longer looking at here. There's no point attacking that, so I think develop the bishop, put some pressure on this knight, put some pressure on h2, get ready to think about castling. Might put my queen now behind my bishop. And currently the knight is defended actually twice, pawn and then bishop. So I can't attack it, I can't capture it now, but there may be ideas. So now we're at that crucial point of being complete with development and now thinking about middle game strategy. So what are my ideas? Simply attack down the king side. I want to just get castled and then launch something down the king side using my expendable pawns against his very important defensive pawns. I want to get my queen out, I want to castle, and maybe get my other rook, maybe to the g file, and just start to storm the castle. Good luck, boys. Have fun storming the castle. If you can name the film, you get a bonus point. Okay, so my opponent's actually played very solid to this point. Right, so we have some tension. The first thing I notice is there's a danger of pawn to e5 with a fork on two pieces. We can't have that, can we? So it might be an opportunity for me to drop my bishop back, maybe with ideas of then putting my queen in front of the bishop and thinking about checkmating that way. I have the option to capture with my d-pawn. Now then if I go on to castle, having the d-pawn missing could be good because my rook will actually be on the d-file. So that's an idea. There, maybe pawn takes, maybe knight takes. It's kind of simpler. How many attackers have I got? I've got 1, 2, 3 attackers. And look, 1, 2 defenders. So I think the odds will be in my favour. Now if pawn takes, I can simply earn myself a pawn. Counting attackers and defenders, something that beginners don't do enough. Right? If you have more attackers than there are defenders, normally you should be able to go ahead and make the capture and win material. If it's equal, then you probably won't win material, it'll just be like a regular exchange. And how do we recapture? I think with the bishop, I like my bishop here. I mean, the thing is, it's pointing the wrong way right now, so if it gets swapped off, it gets swapped off. But I like now the fact that it's looking at g2, whereas before, where was it looking? c2, and the king's not there, the king's over here, so you want your bishops pointing on these diagonals towards your opponent's king, wherever he may be. So I'm still pretty comfortable now. Got quite solid pawns. So does my opponent. My opponent's played a good game so far. Okay, and we have an exchange. It'd be nice to shore up this knight with a pawn at some point. Notice there are no pawns on these two files that can bother my knight, so if I can just defend it maybe with a pawn, maybe with f5, that knight should be able to take up residence quite happily. This knight is defended twice and attacked currently only once. So I might put my queen onto that diagonal and maybe think about then kicking the knight with like g5. Then if the knight moves away, I've got bishop takes h2 with check, so there's no option of a trap, there's no f-pawn anyway, so he can't push that. King would have to move. So that could be quite good. So queen there, threaten g5. And the knight can't move with check, because it's on a dark square, my king's on a light square. And knights have to change the colour square every time they move. Okay. Right, well let's simply play this. Alright, I'm conscious that the rook is looking at f7 now. So I'm going to play f5, because that was one of the things that I wanted to do, was just to shore up this knight. But doing this does two things. It allows my king to castle without abandoning the defence of f7, and it gains a bit of space and it protects my knight on there. So I think that's alright. Now I'm going to move my queen to c7, which does two things. It opens up my route to castling and also threatens bishop takes h2 check. You can see that the difference between the way that a 600, 700 player makes and a 1500 player makes, the difference is not necessarily that great. You know, when people play their best chess and when they're careful about not hanging pieces and careful about following principles, the games can come down to very small things, really, in many cases. But the difference between a stronger player and a weaker player, like above 1000 compared to below 1000, is that as you get stronger, you tend to be able to capitalize on those small differences more effectively. I mean, clearly you have to start with the absolute basics, just not giving away material, looking out for checkmate threats, all that kind of stuff. That's bread and butter. But I mean, this player has not made a blunder as far as I can see so far, which is very impressive. So it's going to come down to the finer margins. Yes, I'm a pawn up at this point, but so he miscalculated the sequence of exchanges, allowing me to grab that pawn. So yeah, I'll use his thinking time to plan. So queen to there, then I want to castle, get my king safe, and then we've got the threat of that. I might even deliver that before castling, just to make sure I've got time to do it. Okay, not a brilliant move there. I think all that's doing is really adding a defender to this pawn, which is already defended by the queen, but this bishop doesn't have that much scope on the board at this point in time. It could come here, possibly. We'll see if he notices the threat. Bishop comes here, we'll just probably end up trading off bishops, because it is defended twice on that square, and I only have one defender of my bishop, actually two, so I don't have to respond. Okay, so there we go. He's missed the threat of the check, so I'm just going to throw that in there. King now has to move, I think, to h1. I could even just think about dropping my bishop back to g3. I also actually have a fork, but maybe it would be better to retreat my bishop and then think about delivering the fork. If the king moves to here, you see I've got a fork with check on the king and the rook, winning material. So it's a small oversight, but it could prove to have more of a difference. And that's what happens. These small differences tend to compound during the game. Okay, so retreat the bishop. I think that's fine. And obviously the threat now is knight to g3, check, winning the rook. Winning the exchange, really, because I won't keep my knight. Still haven't castled, but look at this. These missing pawns are going to be telling, I think, in this game. So white is now 2 pawns down, and they are significant pawns. Okay. I don't want to give up my bishop, so I could just drop my bishop back down to e7 and maintain this threat. I think that's okay. See, being aware of forks is just one of those tactical defensive habits that you just need to get into. And it starts with, okay, my king and my rook and my queen are actually all 2 squares apart on the same line. And if you see that, then you need to tune your senses to, is there a potential fork from a knight? Well, yes, there is. Same thing if you've got pieces like the king and queen that are 1, 2, 3, 4 squares apart, then they could be vulnerable to a knight fork there. Of course, not in this instance, because that square is defended by 3 pieces, no less. But this one is undefended. So that's the one that I would go for. Okay. Right, okay, there's an undefended pawn here. But if queen takes that, I'll probably just castle. So is it now time to go in with my fork idea? Or is it time to defend this pawn? That's the question. I could push the pawn. If pawn takes, I've got queen takes. That's okay. Quite interesting. If I deliver this, king moves, I grab that. Maybe I have time to push the pawn anyway. Let's do that. Let's go in and attack. Make life difficult, leave my opponent on the back foot. There's also actually a free bishop. So here's a question. Do you grab the undefended bishop or do you grab the defended rook? If the king moves to h2, aha, okay. So this is interesting. You see, if the king had moved here, I could have grabbed the bishop or the rook with check. So he's made the right move in this instance, but now I can grab the bishop with check, which is interesting. So where's the king going to go now? If it goes back into the corner, I'm going to repeat the check and then win the rook. So this is turning out quite profitable. Okay, I think that's the better move. I do have queen here, but that could drop the knight. I have a check with the bishop there. Then pawn pushes, queen comes in with check. Maybe something in that. Pawn pushes, then the knight falls. Okay, let's try this. Pawn pushes, I can actually capture it with the knight. That's the best approach, because it's defended by bishop and queen. Or we've got king takes. That's also quite likely. But that probably wasn't the best move on my part. Could still drop my queen in there, threatening these. Okay, yeah, so we've had the capture. Right, so how are we in terms of material? I'm 2 pawns up at this point, that's all. I kind of got overexcited and blew my advantage there. Okay, now I'm going to castle. If queen takes here, that would be quite good for me. I'll probably just centralise my rook, attack the queen, and also then when the queen moves, that bishop will be pinned. So I feel like I've got better king safety at this point. I've got a pawn majority. Got pawns on these files that have no counterparts. Black has this extra pawn on the D file, but having the D file clear is good for me. So King O goes over here, for example. Okay, there we go. It's exactly as I predicted. Queen could grab another pawn, but I'm not concerned about these pawns. Removing the pawns from the middle of the board now is good for me, because that's where White's king is. So you can clear away those pawns and really open up the centre. I've got a queen, I've got 2 rooks. Got all kinds of opportunities to make life difficult. Okay, there we go, grabbing material. Thank you. Something that beginners will do a lot. So now I want to take advantage of this pin on the bishop. So what can we do there? Got maybe queen in here with a threat, or even threatening to capture the bishop. Quite like that. Queen there threatens queen takes or rook takes. So you see now I can forget about these pawns, and if white wants to spend time gobbling up pawns, then great, that suits me just fine. So I'm going to move my queen in there. Not worried about the back rank, because that square is defended 3 times. And I have a serious threat on the board. I have a second threat of captures g2. So now material is actually equal, but the game is far from equal. You can see I have better king safety, right? I have centralized rooks. White's king has been forced into the middle of the board. White has hanging pieces. Couple. Right, these 2 pawns, both in danger. If I capture that one, I could capture that one on the next turn. There should be big red flashing lights and big sirens going off right now for white. And look, again. So I've almost tricked white here into grabbing material. So, queen there. King can't go there. Think the only move is going to be king to d1. Okay, so let's say queen there, king to d1. I can just grab another pawn. I think it's a no-brainer. I'd like to keep both of my rooks on the back rank, just to be sure. I mean, I'm in a good position right now. Not screwing it up is my primary goal. So I don't want to blunder material. I don't want to fall to a surprise checkmate. Okay. So remember, I have my bishop on here right now. It is under attack from the queen, but I have the initiative. So queen takes d4. Seems to be nothing not to like about that move. Now my rook's controlling the e-file, my queen's on the d-file. The king only has 2 squares to go to. Can't really put the queen in the way, I'll just take it. Okay, and now so my queen is defending my bishop still. I have a check there. It'd be nice to move my knight with check as well. So if, for example, the king comes here, I've got knight to f6 with a discovered check and win the queen. White is in check. That bishop is still hanging. Need to remember that. All right. I could force an exchange with queen to e4. That's a fork on the king and the queen. However, the name of the game right now is just to win. So I'm going to grab another pawn with check. You can see now these pawns that white spent moves just capturing on that side of the board are completely inconsequential to the game. It's got nothing to do with the outcome of this game, and all it's done is taken away a couple of turns from white when white could have thought about some defensive ideas. Okay, I have rook there, which with force rook takes and then bishop takes. My only check is there, but that isn't playable. How about bishop to here? I like that. Bishop to there, so it's defended by the pawn, it's defending the pawn in turn, and it's attacking b2. So I now do have some threats. So it'll take me 2 moves, but queen takes b2 would be checkmate. You can see how silly this knight on the edge of the board is looking as well now. Just not playing any part in the game whatsoever. Can't defend the king, it's too far away. Okay, I think the obvious move will be this. So now I'm threatening checkmate on there, and I think there's only a couple of ways that white can defend, as to move either the rook or the queen up to there. Now if the rook goes up there, I've got an attack on the back rank, which could be devastating. I think that moving the queen down, that's just a blunder. Yeah, and just not tuned in enough to the threat of checkmate. There you go. And that's it. I win 0 points for that. But yeah, my opponent started pretty strongly. But you can see the issues. I've highlighted them as we go. Unnecessary captures, failing to count attackers and defenders, things like that. So if you're around 700 or you're trying to beat players around 700, this is how you do it. And it's simple as that. All right, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed to Chess Bootcamp, please think about subscribing and keep up to date with all the material I put out. Other than that, thank you for your time. See you soon.